The dust cloud rising from the approaching rider caught Lorelei Fraser's attention as she stood on the porch of her small boarding house, wiping her hands on her worn apron. At 43 years old, she had learned to read the desert landscape of Arizona Territory like some women read fashion magazines from back east, and something about the way that rider moved told her he was either lost or looking for something specific. It was May 1885, and Fort McDowell had been seeing more visitors lately, mostly men hoping to stake claims or start ranches now that the Apache Wars had finally settled into an uneasy peace. Lorelei had built her boarding house 5 years ago after her husband Thomas died from fever, leaving her with nothing but debts and a determination to never depend on anyone again. The 2-story wooden structure was modest, but it was hers, paid for with sweat and stubbornness. The rider drew closer, and Lorelei could make out his features now. He was broad-shouldered and sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than out of it. His hat was dusty, his clothes well-worn but clean, and when he dismounted in front of her establishment, she noticed the way he moved, steady and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world and knew exactly how to use it. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His eyes were a startling blue against his sun-weathered face, and Lorelei judged him to be somewhere in his late 40s, maybe early 50s. Silver threaded through the dark hair at his temples. "Would you be Mrs. Fraser?" "I would," she replied, keeping her voice neutral. "If you are looking for a room, I have 2 available upstairs. $3 a week includes breakfast and supper. You provide your own lunch or pay extra. That's more than fair." He pulled off his hat, revealing more of that silver-streaked hair. "Name's Dalton Anderson. I bought the old Mercado Ranch about 10 miles east of here. Been living rough while I get the house fixed up proper, but my back's reminding me I am not 20 anymore." Something about his straightforward manner appealed to Lorelei, though she kept her expression neutral. She had learned the hard way that trust came with a price, and she was not in the market for more lessons. "I keep a respectable house, Mr. Anderson. No drinking, no gambling, and no bringing women upstairs." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, creating lines that suggested he smiled often. "I can abide by those rules just fine, Mrs. Fraser." She showed him to the room, watching as he took in the simple but clean space. The iron bed frame held a thick mattress she had stuffed herself with cotton and horsehair. A washstand stood in one corner, a small table and chair in another. Curtains she had sewn from flour sacks, carefully bleached and dyed, hung at the window. "This will do nicely," Dalton said, setting his saddlebags on the chair. "If you do not mind my asking, madam, how long have you been running this place?" 5 years, Lorelei said from the doorway, one hand on the frame. She had learned to always keep an exit route clear. "I serve breakfast at 6 and supper at 7. You miss them, you miss them. I am not running a restaurant." "Understood." He turned to face her fully, and she found herself caught by the directness of his gaze. There was no calculation there, no measuring her worth as a woman or a potential conquest. He looked at her like she was a person, which was refreshing and unsettling in equal measure. "I appreciate you having space for me." Over the next few days, Lorelei found herself noticing Dalton Anderson more than she liked. He rose early, always on time for breakfast, and ate without complaint whatever she put in front of him. He spoke politely to the other 3 boarders, 2 miners and a bank clerk, but did not engage in the endless speculation and gossip they seemed to thrive on. After breakfast, he would ride out to his ranch, returning just before supper, often covered in dust and looking bone-tired but satisfied. On the 4th evening, he lingered after the meal while she cleared the dishes. The other boarders had retired upstairs or gone out for the evening, and Lorelei was acutely aware they were alone in the dining room. "Mrs. Fraser, I was wondering if I might ask you something," Dalton said, standing when she came to collect his plate. She paused, dish in hand. "You can ask. Cannot promise I will answer." That smile again, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Fair enough. I am going to need help at the ranch. Not heavy labor, but someone who can keep accounts, maybe help with some of the lighter work around the house. I know you run this place, but I thought perhaps you might know of someone who would be interested in earning extra money." Lorelei's first instinct was to say no before she even understood why she was being asked. But the practical side of her, the side that had kept her alive and independent these past 5 years, made her pause. Extra money was nothing to dismiss lightly. The boarding house kept her fed and housed, but there was precious little left over for anything else. "What kind of hours?" she asked carefully. "I was thinking 3 afternoons a week, maybe 4 hours each time. The work is not hard, mostly organizing papers, helping me figure out what supplies I need to order, that kind of thing." He met her eyes. "To be honest, I am better with cattle and horses than I am with numbers and planning. My late wife used to handle all that." The mention of a late wife made something loosen in Lorelei's chest, though she could not have said why. "I might be able to do it myself if the hours work. I have someone who could watch the house in the afternoons. How much are you offering?" They negotiated a fair wage, and Lorelei found herself agreeing to start the following Monday. As Dalton thanked her and headed upstairs, she stood in her empty dining room and wondered what she had just gotten herself into. Monday came faster than she expected. Lorelei had arranged for Martha Simmons, a widow who lived down the street, to mind the boarding house in the afternoons. Martha was reliable and needed the work, so it suited them both. Lorelei changed from her everyday dress into her better one, a deep blue calico that had been her mother's, then felt foolish for caring what she looked like. This was work, nothing more. Dalton arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, riding a sturdy bay mare and leading a gentle-looking dun horse. "I brought Honey for you," he said, dismounting. "She is steady and has an easy gait." Lorelei had not ridden much since Thomas died. She had sold their horses to pay debts. But the skill came back as she settled into the saddle, and soon they were riding east out of Fort McDowell toward Dalton's ranch. The land here was harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels across the desert floor, their arms raised to the cloudless sky. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and gray in the afternoon heat. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals with lazy grace. "It is not much yet," Dalton said as they approached his property, "but it will be." The ranch house was adobe, traditional style with a flat roof and thick walls to keep out the heat. Someone, probably Dalton himself, had been working hard on repairs. New wooden shutters hung at the windows, and the walls looked freshly plastered. A barn stood behind the house, newer than the main building, and Lorelei could see cattle grazing in the distance, perhaps 24 head. Inside, the house was sparse but clean. The main room held a fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and little else. Dalton led her to the table, which was covered in papers, receipts, and ledgers in various states of organization. "This is the mess I mentioned," he said, looking embarrassed. "I keep telling myself I will sort through it, but then something else needs doing, and before I know it, more papers pile up." Lorelei sat down and began sorting through the chaos. She had a good head for numbers, always had, and it did not take long to see what needed doing. Dalton made coffee, strong and black, and they worked in companionable silence for the next few hours. He answered her questions about purchases and sales, and slowly, Order began to emerge from the confusion. "You have been losing money on your hay supplier," she said finally, looking up from a ledger. "I know a man in Fort McDowell who could sell you the same quality for 20% less." Dalton leaned over to look at her figures, and she caught the scent of soap and leather and something else, something distinctly him. She forced herself to focus on the numbers. "I will be damned," he said softly. "I mean, I apologize for the language, but you are absolutely right." "How did I miss that?" "You were busy building a ranch," Lorelei said practically, though something warm stirred in her chest at the admiration in his voice. "Cannot expect to be good at everything." They fell into a routine over the following weeks. 3 times a week, Lorelei would ride out to the Anderson ranch and spend the afternoon organizing his accounts, helping him plan purchases, and gradually bringing order to his business affairs. Dalton, in turn, threw himself into the physical work of building his ranch, often working on repairs while she handled the paperwork. But something else was happening too, something Lorelei had not expected and did not quite know how to handle. She found herself looking forward to those afternoons, to the quiet companionship and the way Dalton listened when she spoke, really listened, like her words mattered. She noticed small things, the way he always made sure there was fresh coffee, how he had repaired the chair she sat in so it did not wobble, the wildflowers that started appearing in a jar on the table. One afternoon in late June, as they sat reviewing the month's expenses, Dalton suddenly spoke. "Mrs. Fraser, may I ask you something personal?" Lorelei looked up, her guard immediately rising. "You can ask. Why did you never remarry? In 5 years seems like plenty of men would have expressed interest." He held up his hand quickly. "I am not prying for gossip's sake. I am genuinely curious about you." She set down her pencil carefully, buying time to think. "I suppose I never saw the point. I was 38 when Thomas died, not exactly a young woman. Most men looking for a wife want someone younger, someone who can give them children and look pretty on their arm. I had nothing to offer but debts and hard work." "Is that what you think?" Dalton's voice was quiet but intense. "That you had nothing to offer?" "I know what I am worth, Mr. Anderson." She met his eyes steadily, refusing to look away. "I am not looking for pretty words or false comfort. Good, because I do not give either one." He pushed back from the table and stood, pacing to the window. His back was to her when he spoke again. "My wife Mary died 7 years ago. Cholera. We had been married 26 years, and I thought that was it for me. Thought I would just work my ranch up in Colorado and wait to die myself." Lorelei stayed quiet, sensing he needed to get this out. "But then I realized something," he continued, turning to face her. "I realized I was not dead yet, and maybe that meant something. So I sold the Colorado place, took my savings, and came down here to start fresh. Not to forget Mary, never that, but to live the years I have got left instead of just existing through them." "That is very philosophical, Mr. Anderson," Lorelei said, trying to keep her tone light even though her heart was beating faster. "Call me Dalton, please." He walked back to the table but did not sit. "And what I am trying to say, badly I will admit, is that I think you are wrong about what you have to offer. These past weeks, you have brought order to my chaos, sense to my confusion. But more than that, I look forward to these afternoons. I look forward to talking with you, to hearing your thoughts, to just being in the same room with you. Dalton." She said his name carefully, testing how it felt. "I am too old for romance, too practical, too set in my ways." "I am not looking for romance," he said, though his eyes said otherwise. "I am looking for forever, not just pretty. I am looking for a partner, someone I can build something with, someone who knows life is not always easy but shows up anyway." Lorelei felt something crack open in her chest, something she had kept carefully locked away for 5 years. That is romance, you fool. Just not the kind they write about in dime novels. His smile was like sunrise. Then maybe that is the kind worth having. They did not kiss that day, did not even touch beyond the accidental brush of hands as she gathered her papers to leave. But something had shifted between them, something acknowledged and real. The next few weeks were sweet torture. Lorelei found herself thinking about Dalton at odd moments. While kneading bread dough, while changing linens, while lying in bed at night listening to the sounds of Fort McDowell settling into sleep. She thought about his steadiness, his quiet humor, the way he treated her like an equal rather than a problem to be solved or a prize to be won. But fear held her back. Fear of being hurt again, of losing herself in someone else's dreams, of being wrong about what she thought she saw in his eyes. Martha Simmons, watching her friend pace the kitchen one morning, finally had enough. Lorelei Fraser, I have known you for 3 years and I have never seen you like this. Whatever is eating at you, either deal with it or let it go, but stop torturing yourself. Lorelei stopped pacing. What if I am fooling myself? What if I am just a convenient solution for him, someone to keep his books and his house? And what if you are not? Martha shot back. What if he sees exactly what I see? A strong, smart, capable woman who deserves to be happy. Are you going to let fear rob you of that possibility? The words hit home harder than Lorelei wanted to admit. That afternoon, riding out to the ranch, she made a decision. She would be honest with Dalton, lay out her fears and doubts, and let him do with them what he would. If he withdrew, at least she would know. If he did not, well, maybe Martha was right. Maybe she deserved a chance at happiness. But when she arrived at the ranch, Dalton was not alone. A young woman, perhaps 25, stood on the porch, and Lorelei felt her heart sink even as she tried to keep her face neutral. "Mrs. Fraser," Dalton called out, genuine pleasure in his voice. "Come meet my niece. Sarah, this is Lorelei Fraser, the woman I have been telling you about." Relief flooded through her, so intense she felt dizzy. A niece. Of course, a niece. Sarah Anderson was pretty in a wholesome way, with her uncle's blue eyes and a warm smile. "Uncle Dalton has been singing your praises in every letter, says you saved him from drowning in his own paperwork." "Your uncle exaggerates," Lorelei said, dismounting and accepting Sarah's offered hand. "But I have enjoyed helping him get organized." "Sarah came down from Colorado to visit for a few weeks," Dalton explained. "I hope you do not mind, but I told her she could sit in this afternoon. She has been helping me work on the house, and I thought she might like to see what we are doing with the accounts." The afternoon passed pleasantly. Sarah was intelligent and asked good questions, and Lorelei found herself liking the younger woman. But she was also acutely aware of Dalton, of the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, of the careful distance he maintained as if afraid to presume too much. After 2 hours, Sarah excused herself to check on the stew she had started for their supper, leaving Lorelei and Dalton alone for the first time that day. "She seems lovely," Lorelei said, organizing papers into neat stacks. "She is. Reminds me a lot of Mary, actually. Same practical nature, same kind heart." He paused. "She knows about you, about how I feel." Lorelei's hand stilled. "And what did you tell her about how you feel, the truth?" "That I have fallen in love with a stubborn, independent woman who is probably too smart to want anything to do with an old rancher like me." The words hung in the air between them. Lorelei forced herself to breathe, to think, to not let panic win. "I am 43 years old," she said finally. "I run a boarding house. I have lines on my face and calluses on my hands. I am set in my ways and do not compromise easily. I cannot give you children. I am too old for romance, Dalton, too practical." "I am not looking for romance," he said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "I am looking for forever, not just pretty. I am looking for you, Lorelei, just exactly as you are. She looked at him then, really looked, and saw it all laid bare in his face, hope and fear and determination and love. Pure, honest love that asked for nothing but offered everything. I am afraid, she whispered. So am I. He reached across the table, palm up, offering but not demanding. But maybe we can be afraid together. Lorelei stared at his hand for a long moment, thinking about all the reasons this was foolish, all the ways it could go wrong, all the pain that love could bring. But she also thought about Martha's words, about the sweetness of these past weeks, about the possibility of happiness she had thought was behind her forever. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and steady, and Lorelei felt something in her chest finally, fully relax. They sat like that for a long moment, connected across the paper-strewn table, not speaking because no words seemed adequate. Sarah's voice calling from the kitchen broke the spell. Uncle Dalton, this stew is not going to season itself. Get in here and tell me where you keep the salt. Dalton laughed, the sound rich and genuine, and brought Lorelei's hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth racing up her arm. Will you stay for supper? Yes, Lorelei said, and meant more than just the meal. Over the next few weeks, with Sarah as a cheerful and surprisingly diplomatic chaperone, Lorelei and Dalton began to build something neither of them had thought they would have again. They were not young lovers, giddy and impractical. They were two people who had known loss and hard work and disappointment, choosing each other with clear eyes and steady hearts. Sarah, for her part, seemed delighted. I was worried about him, she confided to Lorelei one afternoon while the two women worked on mending some of Dalton's shirts. He had protested that he could do his own mending, but they had overruled him. After Aunt Mary died, he just sort of shut down for a while. Coming down here was the first sign he wanted to live again, and meeting you seems to have finished what moving started. He is a good man, Lorelei said, threading her needle, but I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to realize I am not what he thought. Or maybe, Sarah said gently, you could trust that he knows exactly what he wants and it is you. Those words stayed with Lorelei. Trust had never come easy to her, but Dalton was proving himself worthy of it day by day. He showed up when he said he would. He listened when she spoke. He respected her opinions and her boundaries. He made her laugh, which she had not realized she missed until it started happening regularly. One evening in early August, as the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and purple, Dalton asked her to take a walk with him. They left Sarah cleaning up after supper and walked out past the barn to a small rise that overlooked his property. I wanted to show you something, he said, pointing to the valley below. See that flat area near the creek? I have been thinking about building there. Building what? Lorelei asked, though her heart had started to beat faster. A bigger house. This one is fine for me alone, but I was thinking about the future, about maybe having someone to share it with. He turned to face her, and in the fading light, his eyes were very blue. About you moving out here if you wanted. We could keep your boarding house, hire someone to run it, and you could still have that income. But I want you here, Lorelei. I want to wake up next to you. I want to build something together. Are you asking me to marry you? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I am asking if you would consider it. I know it is fast by some standards, but at our age, I see no point in wasting time when I know what I want. He took her hands in his. I love you, Lorelei Fraser. I love your strength and your practicality and the way you hum when you are working on the accounts. I love the lines on your face because they show you have lived, really lived. I want to spend whatever years I've got left loving you, if you will let me. Lorelei felt tears prick her eyes, which annoyed her. She was not a woman who cried easily. I have not had an easy life, Dalton. I have scars inside and out. I can be stubborn and difficult. Good thing I am patient then." His smile was tender. "You do not have to answer now. Think about it. Talk to Sarah if you want. She is a good listener. Talk to your friend Martha. But know that I mean every word. I am not looking for forever, not just pretty. I am looking for you." That night, lying in her bed at the boarding house, Lorelei let herself imagine it. Waking up at the ranch, having coffee with Dalton while they planned their day, working alongside him to build something lasting. Growing old together, which suddenly did not seem like a burden but a gift. She was afraid, yes, but she was also tired of letting fear make her decisions. The next morning she found Martha in the kitchen before breakfast service. "I need to tell you something." Martha looked up from the biscuits she was rolling out. "Finally, I have been waiting for you to talk. Sit down and tell me everything." Lorelei poured them both coffee and told her friend about Dalton's proposal, about her fears and her hopes, about the life she could have if she was brave enough to reach for it. Martha listened without interrupting, and when Lorelei finished, she reached across and took her friend's hand. "Lorelei, I am going to say something, and I want you to really hear me. You deserve this. You deserve love and partnership and happiness. Not because you have earned it through suffering, but just because you are a human being who is alive. So the question is not whether you deserve it. The question is whether you are brave enough to accept it. What if it does not work out? What if it does?" Martha countered. "What if you get 20 good years with a man who loves you? Would not that be worth the risk?" When Lorelei rode out to the ranch that afternoon, she had her answer ready. But when she arrived, something was wrong. Dalton's horse was there, but he was not in the house. Sarah met her at the door, her face worried. "He is out by the south pasture. One of the cattle got tangled in some old wire fencing and he went to free it. That was 2 hours ago and he should have been back by now." Fear, cold and sharp, cut through Lorelei. "Show me where." They saddled horses quickly, and Sarah led the way across the property. Lorelei's mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. The Arizona desert was beautiful but unforgiving, full of dangers from rattlesnakes to scorpions to simple accidents that could kill a man if he was alone. They found him near a ravine, sitting propped against a rock with his legs stretched out at an awkward angle. The cow, freed from the wire, had wandered off, but Dalton was clearly hurt. Relief that he was alive warred with worry as Lorelei dismounted and ran to him. "I am fine," he said, which was obviously a lie. His face was gray with pain and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the late afternoon coolness. "Just a broken leg, I think. That damned cow spooked and knocked me into the ravine. Took me a while to climb back out." "You are an idiot," Lorelei said, her voice shaking. She was already running her hands carefully over his leg, assessing the damage. The break was obvious, a nasty one just above the ankle. "Sarah, we need to splint this before we move him." They worked together, Sarah running back for supplies while Lorelei stayed with Dalton, making him drink from her canteen and talking to keep him conscious and calm. "This is a terrible time to ask," Dalton said, his voice strained with pain. "But did you think about what I said last night?" "This is absolutely the worst time to ask," Lorelei agreed. She carefully cut away his pant leg to get a better look at the injury. "Hold still. This is going to hurt. Everything already hurts." He caught her hand. "Lorelei, I need to know if something happens to me." "Nothing is going to happen to you," she said fiercely. "You are going to let us splint that leg, and then we are going to get you back to the house, and then I am going to ride into Fort McDowell and get Dr. Harrison. You are going to be fine." "But if I am not?" "You are going to be fine because I am not done with you yet, Dalton Anderson." She looked him straight in the eye, her fear transmuting into anger because anger was easier to handle. You asked me to marry you, and I have not given you my answer yet, and you do not get to escape on a technicality." His laugh was pained but genuine. "Is that a yes?" "Yes, you impossible man. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will move out to this ranch and help you build a life. Yes, I will wake up next to you and argue with you about cattle prices and love you until one of us dies. But that is not going to be today. Do you understand me?" Sarah returned with supplies, and together the two women fashioned a splint from branches and strips of cloth. Dalton bore it stoically, only hissing through his teeth when they had to move the leg to position the splint properly. Getting him on a horse was a nightmare that Lorelei tried hard to forget even as it was happening. They managed it eventually, with him riding in front of Sarah while Lorelei led both horses slowly back to the ranch house. Every jarring step made Dalton go a shade paler, but he stayed conscious, which was the main thing. Once they had him settled on his bed, Lorelei rode hard for Fort McDowell. Dr. Harrison was just sitting down to his supper, but came without complaint, grabbing his bag and following her back into the darkening desert. By the time they returned to the ranch, Sarah had cleaned the wound and elevated Dalton's leg on pillows. She had also gotten some whiskey into him for the pain, which Lorelei was grateful for because what came next was not going to be pleasant. Dr. Harrison, a competent man in his 60s who had seen every injury the frontier could produce, examined the break carefully. "Clean fracture, which is good. I can set it, but you need to understand, Mr. Anderson, that you are going to be off that leg for at least 6 weeks, maybe more. And there is no guarantee it will heal straight." "Do what you have to do, Doc," Dalton said. He looked at Lorelei. "You do not have to stay for this part." "I am not going anywhere," she said, and took his hand. Setting the bone was as awful as she had feared, but Lorelei held tight to Dalton's hand and did not look away. When it was done, the doctor splinted the leg properly and left instructions for care, along with laudanum for the pain and strict orders that Dalton was not to put weight on the leg under any circumstances. After the doctor left, Sarah made coffee and sandwiches that none of them felt like eating but did anyway because it was practical. Lorelei sat by Dalton's bed, still holding his hand, thinking about how quickly everything could change. "You should go home," Dalton said quietly. His eyes were heavy from the laudanum, but he fought to stay awake. "Martha will worry. I sent Sarah to tell her I am staying here tonight." Lorelei brushed hair back from his forehead, allowing herself the tenderness she usually kept locked away. "Someone needs to watch you, make sure you do not develop a fever." "Bossy," he murmured, but he was smiling. "You said you loved that about me. I love everything about you." His words were starting to slur as the medication took hold. "Going to marry you, soon as I can stand." "You just rest now." She pulled the blanket up over him. "We have time." She dozed in the chair by his bed, waking frequently to check his temperature and make sure he was breathing easy. Sarah had taken the other bedroom, but she too checked in several times during the night. At some point before dawn, Lorelei found herself thinking about what might have happened if they had not found him, if he had been hurt worse, if she had waited too long to give him her answer. Life was uncertain. She had always known that intellectually, but sitting in the darkness listening to Dalton breathe, it hit her with renewed force. They were not young. They did not have the luxury of wasting time on fear. In the morning, she made breakfast while Sarah helped Dalton with his needs, both of them carefully maintaining his dignity as much as possible. He was in pain but alert, and the lack of fever was a good sign. "I need to go back to town," Lorelei said, bringing him coffee and eggs. "But Martha can come out and sit with you this afternoon if Sarah needs a break." "You do not have to do that," Dalton protested. "Yes, I do. You are going to be my husband and you are hurt, and I am going to make sure you are taken care of properly." She said it matter-of-factly, but her hand was gentle as she helped him sit up enough to eat. "Besides, we have a wedding to plan." His eyes lit up despite the pain. "How soon?" "As soon as you can stand without falling over," she said. "I am not getting married with the groom flat on his back." Over the next 6 weeks, Lorelei learned the true meaning of partnership. She split her time between the boarding house and the ranch, with Martha taking on more responsibilities in town while Lorelei managed Dalton's household and business. Sarah stayed another 2 weeks, helping with the heavier work, before she had to return to Colorado, but not before extracting a promise that they would write and tell her about the wedding. "Take care of him," Sarah said, hugging Lorelei goodbye, "and let him take care of you too." That is the important part. Watching Dalton heal was an exercise in patience for both of them. He chafed at the restrictions, wanting to be up and working, while Lorelei had to constantly remind him that healing took time. But there were also sweet moments. Evenings sitting on the porch watching the sunset, mornings over coffee planning their future, quiet conversations that revealed the depths of each other's hearts. "Tell me about your first marriage," Dalton said one evening. They were on the porch, him with his leg propped up, her in the chair beside him. "If that is not too painful." Lorelei considered the question. "Thomas was a good man, but we were young when we married. I was 18, he was 22. We did not really know each other, not the way I know you. We built a decent life together, but there was always something missing. Love, I suppose, though I did not realize it at the time. We were partners in survival, which is not nothing, but it is not the same as being partners in life. Do you regret it? No, it made me who I am. But I am glad this time is different." She reached over and took his hand. "I am glad I get to choose with my eyes wide open." "What about children?" he asked quietly. "Do you regret not having them?" "Sometimes. But I also know it was not in the cards for me, and I have made peace with that." She looked at him. "Does it bother you that I cannot give you children? I have Sarah and her 3 brothers, and they have given me more nieces and nephews than I can keep track of. I am not lacking for family." He squeezed her hand. "Besides, I want you for you, not for what you can or cannot give me. I thought I made that clear." "You did," she said softly, "but it is still good to hear." 8 weeks after his injury, Dr. Harrison declared Dalton's leg healed enough to walk on with a cane. It would always be a bit stiff, he warned, and might pain him in cold weather, but he should regain most of his function with time and exercise. "Does this mean I can finally get married?" Dalton asked, and the doctor laughed. "If this woman is willing to take on a cranky patient like you have been, I would say marry her quick, before she changes her mind." They planned a simple ceremony at the church in Fort McDowell for the first Saturday in October. Lorelei sewed herself a new dress, dark green rather than white, because she was practical and white was impractical. But she let Martha talk her into adding lace at the collar and cuffs. Dalton bought a new suit and got his hair trimmed, looking almost nervous when he showed up at her boarding house the night before the wedding. "I know we have talked about this, but I wanted to make sure you are certain," he said, standing in her parlor, hat in hand. "Once we do this, I am not letting you go." "Good," Lorelei said, "because I am not planning on going anywhere." The wedding was simple but beautiful. Martha stood up with Lorelei while Dalton had convinced Tom Morrison, a fellow rancher, to serve as his witness. The church was full of people from Fort McDowell, more than Lorelei had expected, which told her she had made more of an impression on the town than she realized. When the minister asked if she took this man, Lorelei looked into Dalton's blue eyes and said, "I do," with absolute certainty. The kiss that sealed their vows was tender and sweet and full of promise. Lorelei, who had thought she was too old for romance, felt something bloom in her chest that might have been joy. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house, which Martha and several other women had decorated with wildflowers and ribbons. There was food and music, and at some point, Dalton convinced Lorelei to dance with him despite his leg. "You are going to hurt yourself," she protested, even as she let him take her in his arms. "Worth it," he said, and swayed with her to the music, his hand steady at her waist. They spent their wedding night at the ranch in the adobe house that would now be their shared home. Lorelei had moved most of her possessions out earlier in the week, leaving Martha in charge of the boarding house with a generous share of the profits. The bedroom was dark except for lamplight, and Lorelei felt suddenly, unexpectedly nervous. "We do not have to do anything you are not comfortable with," Dalton said gently. He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling off his boots. "I am happy just to hold you." "I am not fragile," Lorelei said, but her voice was softer than usual, "just a bit out of practice." "Then we will practice together." He stood, slowly because of his leg, and came to her. His hands were gentle as they found the buttons of her dress. "We have all the time in the world." They did take their time, learning each other with patience and tenderness. And if there were tears on Lorelei's cheeks when Dalton held her after, they were not from sadness but from the overwhelming realization that she was allowed to have this intimacy and connection and pure, honest love. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he whispered back. "My stubborn, practical, perfect wife." They fell into married life with surprising ease. Lorelei kept her hand in the boarding house business but spent most of her time at the ranch, working alongside Dalton to build the property into something successful. She handled the accounts and correspondence while he managed the cattle and physical work, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. In December, a cold snap moved through Arizona territory, and Dalton's leg ached like the doctor had predicted. Lorelei made him hot compresses and insisted he rest by the fire, reading to him from the newspaper while he grumbled about being pampered. "You were right to insist on the bigger house," she said one evening, looking at the plans they had been refining. "We should start building in the spring." "You really think we need it?" he asked. "I think we will want the space." She hesitated, then decided to just say it. "Sarah wrote that she might visit for a longer stay next summer, and Tom Morrison's daughter is looking for work. I thought we might hire her to help with the house and the lighter ranch work." "You are planning for us to have a full household," Dalton said, smiling. "I am planning for us to have a life," Lorelei corrected. "A full one with people and purpose and room to grow. Have I mentioned lately that I am grateful I found you?" He pulled her down beside him on the settee they had bought together in Tucson last month. "You might have mentioned it once or twice," she said, settling against his shoulder. Christmas that year was the happiest Lorelei could remember. She and Dalton rode into Fort McDowell for the church service, then returned to host Martha and several of their other friends for dinner. The house was full of laughter and warmth, and when everyone had gone home, Lorelei and Dalton sat together by the fire, her head on his shoulder. "A year ago I was alone," she said quietly. "Now I have all of this." "We both do," he said, kissing the top of her head, "and we are just getting started." Spring brought new life to the ranch. They broke ground on the new house in March, a larger structure with a proper kitchen and multiple bedrooms and a wide porch that would catch the evening breezes. Dalton hired help from Fort McDowell for the construction, and Lorelei threw herself into planning every detail, from the placement of windows to the design of the kitchen. "You are in your element," Dalton observed one afternoon, watching her sketch ideas on paper. "I never got to do this before," she admitted. "With Thomas, we were always just surviving. This feels like really living." By summer, the house was habitable enough for them to move in, though work continued on the finishing touches. Sarah arrived in June, bringing with her enough energy and enthusiasm to power the whole ranch. She immediately bonded with Jenny Morrison, the young woman Lorelei had hired, and the four of them settled into a comfortable household routine. One evening in late July, Lorelei was working on the accounts when Dalton came to find her. "Take a break," he said. "Come see something." He led her outside and up the small rise behind the house. From there, they could see the whole ranch spread out below. The new house with lamplight glowing in the windows, the barn and corrals, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance, the creek running silver in the moonlight. "This is what I dreamed of," Dalton said, his arm around her waist. "Not just the ranch, but having someone to share it with, having you to share it with." Lorelei leaned into him, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. The grief and struggle, the years of survival, the fear of opening herself up to love again. And then this man, this good, patient, determined man who had looked at her and seen not her age or her limitations but her strength and her worth. "I used to think I was too old for this," she said, "too practical for romance. And now I know better." She turned in his arms to face him. "You taught me that love is not about being young or impractical. It is about choosing each other every single day and building something that lasts. Forever, not just pretty," he said softly. "Forever, not just pretty," she agreed and kissed him as the stars came out overhead. Sarah stayed through September, then returned to Colorado with promises to visit again soon. Jenny proved herself invaluable, managing the household while Lorelei focused on expanding the ranch's operations. They bought more cattle, hired 2 ranch hands, and began building relationships with buyers in Phoenix and Tucson. By their second anniversary, the Anderson ranch was thriving. Lorelei kept meticulous records showing steady profit, and Dalton's expertise with cattle meant they had some of the healthiest stock in the territory. But more than the business success, they had built a life together that felt solid and real and full of joy. "I have been thinking," Dalton said one October evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. This had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of the day. "About what comes next." "What comes next is winter and then spring and then another year of building this ranch," Lorelei said practically. "Why? What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about legacy," he said. "Not children, we have talked about that, but what we leave behind. I would like to set aside some land for Sarah's boys when they are older, if they want to come west. And I thought maybe we could talk to the church about establishing a fund to help widows and widowers in Fort McDowell. People like we were, who need a second chance." Lorelei felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was the man she had married, always thinking of others, always looking for ways to make the world a bit better. "I think that is a wonderful idea. We could call it the Mary and Thomas Fund after our first spouses." "Honoring the past while building the future," Dalton said. "I like that." They started small, with a donation to the church and a promise to contribute regularly. But word spread, and soon other ranchers and business owners were adding to the fund. Within a year, they had helped 3 widows and 2 widowers get back on their feet, either through small loans or by finding them work. "You are making a difference," Martha told Lorelei one day when she visited from town. "People see what you and Dalton have built, and it gives them hope." "We were lucky," Lorelei protested. "Luck had nothing to do with it," Martha said firmly. "You were brave enough to take a chance on love when you thought you were too old for it. That is courage, not luck." The years passed, each one adding to the foundation they had built. Dalton's leg never fully recovered its former strength, but it did not slow him down much. They learned to work around its limitations, and Lorelei became adept at spotting when he had pushed too hard and needed rest, even when he would not admit it. In their 4th year of marriage, they expanded the house again, adding a library because they had both discovered a love of reading in the evenings. Lorelei would read aloud while Dalton worked on smaller tasks like repairing tack or whittling, and those quiet evenings became some of their most treasured times. Sarah married a lawyer in Colorado and had twin daughters, writing long letters full of the chaos and joy of motherhood. She visited when she could, always with her girls, and Dalton proved to be a doting great-uncle. Watching him with the twins, patient and playful, made Lorelei wonder sometimes what kind of father he had been to his own children, if he and Mary had been blessed that way. But they had not, and he seemed content with the family they had built through love rather than blood. On a warm May evening in 1891, Lorelei sat on their porch with Dalton, reviewing the year's accounts. The ranch was more successful than either of them had dreamed, employing 6 people and supporting not just their household, but contributing significantly to Fort McDowell's economy. "You ever regret it?" Dalton asked suddenly. "Giving up the boarding house completely?" Lorelei had sold her share to Martha 3 years ago, finally cutting her last tie to her old life. "Not for a moment. That was survival. This is living." "We are not young anymore," he said, a touch of melancholy in his voice. He was nearly 60 now, and she was approaching 50. Time had left its marks on both of them. More silver in his hair, deeper lines on her face, a certain stiffness in the mornings that had not been there before. "No, we are not young," Lorelei agreed, "but we are happy and we are together and we are building something that will last beyond us. I would say we are exactly where we need to be." "Forever, not just pretty," he murmured. "Forever, not just pretty," she confirmed. That summer they received word that Sarah was coming for an extended visit, and she was bringing all 3 of her children this time. The house filled with noise and laughter, and the particular chaos that came with children ranging from 7 to 12. Lorelei, who had never expected to have anything like a family beyond herself and Dalton, found herself surprisingly adept at managing the controlled chaos. "You are good with them," Dalton observed one evening after the children were finally, mercifully asleep. "They are exhausting," Lorelei said, but she was smiling. "But in a good way. Makes me wish we had done this when we were younger," he said wistfully. "We did what we were meant to do when we were meant to do it," Lorelei said firmly. She had learned over these years with Dalton to trust in the timing of things. "And we have this now, which is more than enough." Sarah's visit lasted 6 weeks, and when she left, she extracted a promise that they would come to Colorado the following summer. "The children adore you both," she said, hugging Lorelei tight, "and you deserve to see something beyond Arizona territory." The thought of traveling was daunting but also exciting. That winter, they planned the trip carefully, arranging for their ranch hands to manage the property in their absence. In June of 1892, they boarded a train north, beginning an adventure neither of them had expected at their age. Colorado was beautiful in a completely different way than Arizona. Where their home was all sun and space and stark beauty, Colorado offered green valleys and snow-capped mountains and air so crisp it almost hurt to breathe. Sarah's husband welcomed them warmly, and the children shrieked with delight at having their uncle and aunt to themselves for 2 whole weeks. "This is a good life," Dalton said one evening as they sat on Sarah's porch. The air was cool, unusual for June, and Lorelei wore a shawl against the chill. "It is," she agreed, "but I am ready to go home to our life." "Me too," he said, smiling. "As wonderful as this is, Arizona is where we belong." They returned to Fort McDowell at the end of June, tanned and tired and full of stories. The ranch had run smoothly in their absence, which spoke to the quality of people they had hired and the systems they had built. But it felt good to be home, to sleep in their own bed, to wake to the familiar sounds of their own cattle and the Arizona desert coming to life. "We should do that every few years," Lorelei said as they settled back into their routine. "Visit family, see new places, but always come back here." "Always come back here," Dalton agreed. As they moved into their late middle age, Lorelei and Dalton became fixtures in Fort McDowell's community. They were known for their generosity, their solid marriage, and their willingness to help neighbors in need. The fund they had started had grown significantly, now helping a dozen families a year. They had quietly become pillars of their community, not through wealth or prominence but through consistent kindness and integrity. On their 7th anniversary, Dalton surprised Lorelei with a gift. It was a small painting professionally done, showing their ranch house at sunset with the two of them on the porch. "When did you have this made?" she asked, tears threatening. "Last time I was in Phoenix. Had a photographer come out and take a picture, then hired an artist to paint from it." He looked almost shy. "I wanted us to remember this, what we built together." "I could never forget," Lorelei said, but she hung the painting in their library where they could see it every evening. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges and joys in equal measure. Dalton's leg grew more troublesome, requiring a cane all the time now instead of just occasionally. Lorelei developed rheumatism in her hands, making some tasks more difficult. But they adapted, finding new ways to manage, always supporting each other. In 1895, Fort McDowell celebrated Arizona Territory Day with a grand festival. Lorelei and Dalton attended, now in their 50s but still active and engaged with their community. At one point, they found themselves dancing, slowly and carefully, while a band played under the stars. "Do you remember our wedding dance?" Dalton asked. "You were supposed to be resting that leg," Lorelei recalled. "But you insisted." "Best decision I ever made," he said. "Well, second best. First was walking into your boarding house looking for a room." "You mean looking for a wife?" she teased. "No, I was looking for a room," he said seriously. "Finding you, falling in love with you, building this life together, that was all grace. Pure, undeserved grace." Later that night, lying in bed with her head on his shoulder, Lorelei thought about grace. She had always been so practical, so focused on survival, that she had never given much thought to concepts like grace or blessing or fate. But maybe that was what this was, what they had. Maybe grace was being given a second chance at happiness when you thought that part of your life was over. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he whispered back, as he had done countless times over the years. "Forever, not just pretty." "Forever, not just pretty," she agreed, and fell asleep in her husband's arms, grateful for every moment of the life they had built together. By 1898, the Anderson Ranch was one of the most successful operations in the territory. They ran 200 head of cattle, employed a dozen people, and had diversified into horse breeding as well. Dalton, now 63, had officially stepped back from the day-to-day physical labor, serving more as an advisor and overseer while younger men did the heavy work. Lorelei, at 56, still kept the accounts and managed the household, though she had finally agreed to hire additional help when her rheumatism flared badly. She remained sharp and engaged, her mind as clear as ever even if her body was showing the wear of a hard life. They spent more time together now, long afternoons on the porch or in the library, talking about everything and nothing. They discussed politics and philosophy, and the changes coming to the territory as statehood seemed increasingly likely. They remembered the past without being trapped by it, and they planned for the future without assuming they would see it all. "I have been thinking about what happens to the ranch when we are gone," Dalton said one autumn evening. They were in their library, a fire crackling in the hearth against the unusual chill. "I know we have talked about leaving it to Sarah's children, but I want to make sure it is all spelled out legal and clear." "I will write to the lawyer in Phoenix," Lorelei said. She had grown comfortable with mortality as she aged, understanding it was not an enemy but simply the end of a story. "We should also make sure the fund is set up to continue without us." "Always practical," Dalton said fondly. "Someone has to be," she replied. "Besides, I learned from the best." They spent that winter putting their affairs in order, not from any sense of impending doom, but simply because it was the responsible thing to do. They updated their wills, established a trust for the widow and widower fund, and wrote long letters to Sarah and her brothers explaining their wishes and their hopes for the property. "There," Lorelei said when they had signed the last document. "Now we can relax and enjoy however much time we have left." "You make it sound so morbid," Dalton protested. "I make it sound realistic," she corrected. "We are not young and we have had a wonderful run. Whatever comes next, we will face it together, but we are ready." Spring of 1899 brought unseasonable heat and drought. The cattle struggled, and water became a constant concern. Dalton and Lorelei worked alongside their ranch hands, managing the crisis with the experience of people who had weathered difficulties before. One particularly brutal afternoon in June, Dalton came in from the range looking more exhausted than Lorelei had ever seen him. She made him sit down, brought him water and food, and insisted he rest. "I am fine," he protested, but his face was gray. "You are pushing too hard," she said firmly. "You have good people working for you. Let them do their jobs while you rest." "Stubborn woman," he muttered, but he did rest, and his color improved. That evening, after supper, they sat on their porch watching the sun set in shades of orange and red. The air was still hot, but a breeze had picked up, bringing some relief. "Do you ever regret it?" Lorelei asked. "Coming to Arizona, starting over?" "Not once," Dalton said. "This is where I was meant to be, where we were meant to be. Even with the drought and the heat and the struggles. Especially with those things," he said, "because we faced them together." The drought finally broke in late July with a series of thunderstorms that rolled across the territory, bringing blessed rain. The land began to recover, the cattle improved, and life returned to normal. But the crisis had taken its toll on both of them, and they moved a little slower afterward, a little more carefully. On their 14th anniversary, they decided to celebrate quietly, just the two of them. Lorelei made Dalton's favorite meal, roast beef with potatoes and carrots from their garden, and they ate by candlelight in their dining room. 14 years, Dalton said, raising his glass of wine. "Best 14 years of my life." "Mine too," Lorelei said, clinking her glass against his. And it was true. These years with Dalton had been richer and fuller and more joyful than anything she had experienced before. They had built something together that went beyond a business or a property. They had built a partnership based on love and respect and genuine friendship. "I was thinking," Dalton said after dinner as they moved to the porch for their evening ritual. "We should take another trip. Maybe go see Sarah again or travel somewhere new. What do you think about California?" "I think you are trying to avoid admitting you are getting old," Lorelei said, but she was smiling. "But I also think a trip sounds wonderful. Let me check the accounts and we can plan something for next spring." But spring brought unexpected news. In March, they received a telegram that Sarah's husband had died suddenly of a heart attack. Lorelei and Dalton immediately began preparations to travel to Colorado for the funeral. The trip was somber, and Sarah's grief was profound. But having them there helped, and Dalton's steady presence and Lorelei's practical support got Sarah through the worst of it. They stayed for a month, helping her manage the immediate aftermath, and making sure she had a plan for moving forward. "I do not know what I would do without you too," Sarah said the night before they left. "You have been more parents to me than aunt and uncle." "That is what family does," Lorelei said, hugging the younger woman. "And you are not alone. Write to us, visit when you can, and know that you always have a home with us if you need it." They returned to Arizona in late April, both feeling the weight of their years more heavily. Loss had a way of reminding you of mortality, of the preciousness of time. "We are not promised tomorrow," Dalton said one evening. They were in their usual spot, the porch at sunset, but the conversation was heavier than normal. "No, we are not," Lorelei agreed. "But we have today and we have each other, and that is more than enough." "More than enough," he echoed, taking her hand. The new century arrived with celebration and speculation about what changes it might bring. Lorelei and Dalton, now firmly in their 60s, celebrated quietly at home, toasting the new year and each other. "A new century," Lorelei said, looking at the stars overhead. "Hard to believe." "We have seen a lot of change," Dalton agreed. "The territory is growing, more people coming every year. Fort McDowell is not the small outpost it was when I first arrived." "Do you mind the changes?" "Some of them," he admitted. "But change is inevitable. What matters is what we built here, what we leave behind." They spent the early years of the new century continuing to build their legacy. The fund they had started now helped dozens of families a year. The ranch continued to prosper under good management, and their marriage, tested by time and hardship, remained strong. In 1903, on a warm October day, Lorelei and Dalton celebrated their 18th anniversary. They were 61 and 68 respectively, their hair fully silver, their bodies marked by age and hard work, but their love undiminished. 18 years, Lorelei said, sitting beside her husband on their porch. "When you first asked me to marry you, I thought I was too old for romance." "And I told you I was not looking for romance," Dalton said. "I was looking for forever, not just pretty." "And did you get what you were looking for?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "I got more than I ever dreamed of," he said, kissing her softly. "I got you, and I got this life, and I got to spend the best years of my life with the woman I love. What more could anyone ask for?" "Nothing," Lorelei whispered, tears in her eyes. "Absolutely nothing." They sat together as the sun set over their ranch, over the life they had built, over the love that had sustained them through everything. The land stretched out before them, beautiful and harsh and home. The house behind them was filled with memories of laughter and conversation and quiet evenings by the fire. The life they had created was more than either of them had thought possible that day, when a dusty rider had pulled up in front of a boarding house looking for a room. "I love you," Dalton said into the gathering darkness. "I love you too," Lorelei replied. "Forever, not just pretty." "Forever, not just pretty," he agreed. And as the stars came out overhead, they sat together in the life they had chosen, the love they had built, the forever they had found when both of them thought their chance for happiness had passed. They had proven that it was never too late for love, never too old for romance, if you were brave enough to reach for it when it appeared. The years that followed were gentler, quieter. Dalton's health began to decline slowly but steadily, his leg causing him more pain, his stamina not what it had been. Lorelei's rheumatism worsened, making some days difficult. But they adapted, always finding ways to support each other, to maintain their independence while accepting help when necessary. In 1905, Sarah moved to Arizona with her 3 children, now young adults. She bought a house in Phoenix and visited the ranch often, bringing life and laughter to Lorelei and Dalton's quieter existence. The children, now in their 20s, had grown into fine young people, and watching them gave both Lorelei and Dalton deep satisfaction. "This is what it is all about," Dalton said one evening after Sarah and her family had left. "Building something that lasts beyond us." "We did that," Lorelei said with quiet satisfaction. "The ranch, the fun, the people we have helped. We built something good." On a cool evening in October 1907, Lorelei and Dalton celebrated their 22nd anniversary. They were 65 and 72, still together, still in love, still finding joy in each other's company. 22 years, Dalton marveled. "Feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once." "I know what you mean," Lorelei said. She sat beside him in the library now instead of on the porch. The Arizona evenings were too cool for his old bones, though he would never admit it. "Sometimes I think about that first day you showed up at my boarding house. What if I had turned you away?" "You would never have done that," he said confidently. "Too practical. You needed the money." "True," she admitted with a smile, "but I am glad you came, glad you stayed. Glad you saw something in a 43-year-old widow that was worth pursuing." "I saw everything," he said simply. "Everything that mattered." They sat in comfortable silence, the fire crackling, the house quiet around them. After a while, Dalton spoke again. "Lorelei, I want you to know something. When my time comes, I want you to keep living. Really living, not just existing. Promise me that." "Dalton," she started to protest. "Promise me," he insisted. "You taught me that it is never too late to start again, to reach for happiness. If I go first, I need to know you will remember that." "I promise," she said, her voice thick with tears. "But you are not going anywhere yet." "Not planning on it," he agreed. "But when the time comes, whenever that is, I want you to know I have no regrets, not a single one. You gave me the best years of my life, Lorelei. You made me happier than I ever thought I could be." "You did the same for me," she whispered. They held each other close. Two people who had found love when they thought that chapter of their lives was closed, who had built a life together based on respect and partnership and genuine affection. They had faced challenges and losses, joys and triumphs, and through it all, they had chosen each other day after day, year after year. The ranch continued to thrive under the management of Sarah's oldest son, who had taken over most of the day-to-day operations. Lorelei still kept the accounts, though with more help now, and Dalton served as a consultant and advisor when needed. But mostly, they enjoyed their quiet life together, surrounded by family and friends, secure in the knowledge that they had lived well and loved deeply. On a warm spring day in 1909, as they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, Dalton had insisted on being outside despite the distance to walk. Lorelei took his hand. "You remember what you said to me that day?" she asked. "When I told you I was too old for romance." "I said I was not looking for romance," Dalton replied, his voice still strong even if his body was failing. "I was looking for forever, not just pretty." "And did you find it?" she asked, though she knew the answer. "I found everything," he said, squeezing her hand. "Everything and more." They sat together as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and orange and purple, as the land they loved stretched out before them, as the life they had built together continued around them. They had proven that love knew no age limits, that it was never too late to start again, that the best kind of romance was the kind built on solid foundations of respect and partnership and genuine care. Dalton lived to see his 75th birthday in early 1910, surrounded by family at a celebration Sarah organized. It was clear to everyone that his time was growing short, but he remained cheerful and engaged, telling stories and laughing with his great-nieces and nephews. "I have had a good run," he told Lorelei that night as she helped him to bed. "Better than most, thanks to you." "We have had a good run together," she corrected, "and we are not done yet," but they both knew the truth. On a quiet morning in late March, Dalton passed away peacefully in his sleep, Lorelei beside him as she had been for 25 years. His last words, whispered the night before, had been simple. "I love you. Forever, not just pretty." The grief was profound, but Lorelei found comfort in the life they had built, in the memories they had made, in the knowledge that they had loved each other fully and completely. She kept her promise to him, continuing to live rather than just exist. She stayed involved with the ranch and the fun they had started, and she spent time with Sarah and her family. But every evening, as the sun set over the Arizona desert, she would sit on their porch alone now but not lonely and remember. Remember the day he rode up to her boarding house. Remember the way he looked at her, seeing her value when she had stopped seeing it herself. Remember the life they built together, the love they shared, the forever they created when both of them thought their chance had passed. Lorelei Fraser Anderson lived to the age of 72, passing peacefully in her sleep in 1916. Her last thoughts were of Dalton, of the love they had shared, of the truth he had taught her all those years ago, that it was never too late for love, never too old for romance, if you were brave enough to reach for it. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, two souls who had found each other when they least expected it were together again, proving once more that the best kind of love is not the one that looks pretty on the outside, but the one that lasts forever on the inside.